All right, so we discussed the Protestant Reformation. Now, I'd like to talk about what were known as the three G's: gold, God, and glory, the peopling of the New World. Yes, the New World was already peopled, but we're talking about the European peopling. Now, the three G's are the three general reasons for overseas discovery and settlement by European powers. None of the three is as simple as it may appear. You may read, as you read through the first chapters of the text, as well as some of the supplemental documents, this should become more clear. Now, gold and other riches were a major economic motivator for explorers. Many had hoped to simply land on the continent, find gold immediately, but the truth, of course, is finding any such riches was quite a bit more complex. And of course, this was not simply about gold. This was about finding and earning wealth, about individual and state opportunity. We must consider both push and pull factors when discussing the role of gold in migration. Now, John Frederick Martin is one scholar who believes economic factors rather than religious factors drove migration. He points out that towns were organized along business principles, for example, the Joint Stock Company. And other scholars, such as Terry Lee Anderson, Bernard Bailyn, and Mark Valeri, point out the economic success enjoyed by these early settlers, even John Winthrop, the Puritan leader and the individual who came up with the idea of a city upon a hill, and urged the practice of Puritan values to show the rest of the world what an ideal community could look like. Even he pointed out, his experience, because part of what drove Winthrop was financial motivation or the opportunity to gain riches. And so even his example points out that economic motivations fostered migration. In a letter to a colleague, for example, Winthrop explained that his current situation in England was not, quote, economically tenable, and that a move to the New World would provide him an opportunity for economic growth. This would be a push factor. Many in England were quite limited in opportunity. So that is your push factor. The pull, of course, a new, fresh world. There's opportunity. Now, I mentioned joint stock companies. These are important to understand. Generally, colonists before and during the Revolution associated themselves with being English. Now, I'm ahead of the game here. Of course, we're a week or two away from the Revolution. But they practiced English culture. I'm talking about those who lived in the colonies. They practiced English culture. They came primarily from England, and they followed English legal codes. But the English were a bit late to the colonial game. France, Spain, and Portugal beat them to it. Spanish settlers had been in the Southwest for roughly a century, including Texas and California, which we'll get to down the road. The French claimed a large swath of land from Appalachia to the Rockies. Portugal succeeded in South America, primarily Brazil, and enjoyed some limited success in Canada as well. This was partially because England simply did not have the economic resources that these other empires had. Religious conflict in England during the 16th century also impeded such exploration, as the country needed to work through its own internal issues before considering expansion. Last, England was not the superpower as they would be a short time later. England had always had a powerful navy, but at this time Spain dominated the seas until, of course, the great Queen Elizabeth turned things around by defeating the massive Spanish Armada in 1588. From this point forward, England was the leading nation at sea, and Spain's empire would begin to decline as England steadily rose. Still, though, there was little interest among the crown to finance these risky expeditions. One important development during this time was the Joint Stock Company, which was born during this time, considered an early corporation, if you will. This was significant for a handful of reasons. First, because the crown did not finance these voyages, private interests came together to finance their own excursions. A group of wealthy investors purchased stock, provided capital for joint stock ventures, thus facilitating these expeditions. Startup costs were significant, but the return on investment could be quite large, even if it meant remaining patient for potentially years for these profits to actually come through. This contrasted with what other countries had done previously. Spanish and French settlements were paid for and developed by their kings. Thus, those who went to work did not necessarily have any stake in the success, as they were essentially paid by the king regardless. But for private English investors, there was risk and reward, and the reward was theirs, not the king's. Thus, they had serious motivation for their ventures, and success would directly benefit them. This is one reason English settlements tended to be more successful. Simply put, because these people earned direct returns on their investments, they worked harder, they worked more efficiently, and they worked more patiently to accrue these profits. Because they had, the old, as the saying goes, they had skin in the game. They were invested. If they did not make any money, then they didn't make any money and they were broke. So work hard, earn the money. If you want to make money, just work hard and you'll get there. Now, who participated in these joint stock companies? Many were the second sons of noble families. Why? Under English law, only the firstborn male could inherit property, so those who came later needed to find different ways to earn their fortunes. These companies provided one such avenue. Merchants who dissented from the Church of England also invested, as the Stuart monarchs leaned toward Catholicism, which alienated and eventually suppressed Puritans. They realized they could not practice their religion freely in England, so taking up residence in the New World offered them the opportunity to not only earn riches, but worship as they preferred. Last, labor was aplenty. The poor had multiplied in the cities of London and Bristol due to advances in agriculture. They had no land, no work, no opportunity, and they were willing to take any chance that they could to help them and their families. They would provide the bulk of early labor in the New World. Sorry, my dogs are fighting here. That will appease them. So that's gold. We get to God. Virginia DeJohn Anderson argues otherwise. She argued that religion was the main reason people migrated to the New World. For example, wages were steady. There was little economic distress during this specific time. Thus, people did not have a reason to leave England. Furthermore, because these excursions were often cooperative in a sense, contracts were signed by groups of people, for example, folks who were concerned primarily with their own material improvement would not have so willingly acceded to mutual cooperation, to basing their own success and future on the work of others. Meaning, if you are working and you have this cooperative and you have to rely on that person and that person does not work hard, that affects you. So what she's saying is if these people are so interested in profits, why would they put their own future in the hands of somebody else? And then there are scholars such as Stephen Innes who argues that both religion and economic opportunity played off each other, that the two together provided the rationale for migration for many. Not only was Puritanism not antithetical to commerce and profit-making, Innes argues that Puritanism was integral to the development of the New England economy. Here he borrows a page from Max Weber and Weber's legendary Protestant work ethic. Innes argued that Calvinist dedication to work and the doctrine of calling fostered a culture of discipline which nurtured success. These cultural practices, thrift, hard work, frugality, integral to the success of the colonies. Thus, it was these religious aspects that led to economic success. Interesting. Of course, Max Weber popularized that around the turn of the 20th century. Regardless of how one argues religion was a main motivator for many, there is general agreement this was not about freedom of religion, at least not yet. And we're going to get to examples of that. Much is made of the fact people came to escape religious persecution, and this is certainly true. The New World provided a clean slate of sorts, one which was not dominated by any specific religion or tradition, and was open to those who had suffered from repression in Europe. But from the readings, you will further recognize the importance of missionary work. Those who came over and represented either Protestantism or Catholicism were trying to spread their religion. For some of us today, this might seem arrogant, narcissistic, but for them, religion was the most important thing in their lives, and they wanted to share it with people who did not otherwise enjoy that. Now, getting back to this idea of religious persecution, none of this is to say that there was religious freedom in the New World in the 16th or 17th centuries. Of course, freedom of religion is codified in our Constitution, but in the colonial world during this time, there was no religious freedom. And quite to the contrary, in New England, for example, Puritanism was the official religion. People were forced to attend services weekly and contribute to the church, and any worship of an outside religion was not only forbidden, but subject to heinous punishment. For example, John Clark, who's really the father of religious freedom in the colonies, Obadiah Holmes and John Crandall attempted to convert Lynn, Massachusetts residents to join them as Baptists. When they were found out by authorities, they were fined and threatened with whipping if they did not leave the area. Holmes would suffer a whipping, and the three left immediately thereafter. Quakers Christopher Holder and John Copeland. Now, Quakerism, remember this, because Quakerism is definitely the foundation of the anti-slavery movement in America. The Society of Friends, we're going to get, that will be a major theme in class throughout the term. But here we have Quakers, two of them, returned to Massachusetts Bay Colony after being whipped and banished in hopes of sharing their version of Christianity with these Calvinists. Authorities arrested them, cut off an ear of each of them, and banished them, quote, upon pain of death. From that point forward, any Quaker who was banished but returned was subject to trial with death penalty as the punishment. Not as a punishment, but as the punishment. Massachusetts Bay Colony, the largest in New England, was a theocracy, plain and simple, though other colonies in the New World were more open. And when I say theocracy, again, Puritanism or Calvinism drove New England. Rhode Island, for example, became the colony of true religious freedom early on, as it welcomed those who practiced other faiths and had been banished because of it. John Clark, as I mentioned earlier, one of the founders of Rhode Island, was instrumental in developing what we consider today to be religious freedom. William Penn helped to found what would become the colony of Pennsylvania as a place for Quakers, or the Society of Friends, to practice peacefully. But he also welcomed other religions. Maryland would become the New World's home for Catholics, but one of the expressed goals was for Protestants and Catholics to live amicably side by side. This wasn't happening in Europe. Enlightenment ideals, essential to the forming of the United States itself, were key to this concept of religious freedom and its inclusion in our Constitution. One may ask, though, how this played a role in the foundation of what would become America and ultimately contribute to the creation of American exceptionalism. Now, it's important to note here, when I say American exceptionalism, I'm not saying that we are exceptional, we're the greatest country in the world, nobody can touch us, okay? I'm talking about exceptional being different, that our development was essentially different from other countries. Europe was still dominated by the centralized authority of the Catholic Church, but Protestants developed a decentralized sense of authority, which was particularly true, again, with the Congregationalism that would dominate New England. This reflects hostility towards centralized authority in general, for example, a king. It also anticipates the desire for a limited government, something that was key to the founders and has been a staple of American government since our founding, in theory. The Reformation also led a new type of inquiry and willingness to question authority, something that I talked about in the previous video lecture. Prior, one was to absolutely and unconditionally subject to the papacy's wishes. The church mandated subservience. The Reformation broke down this authority. And again, this is what facilitates much of this peopling in the New World. Because with the Reformation and the willingness to challenge authority, what does this lead to? This leads to some persecution. It leads to some marginalization of these other groups. So how does the Protestant Reformation contribute to the founding of the New World? This is one way. It led people to move because, again, they wanted to avoid religious persecution. They're not going for freedom of religion, but Puritans, again, are not able to practice what they want in England, but if they go to the New World, they can. Protestantism also played a role in the economic well-being of the colonies, which I've already mentioned. And again, as Weber has put it, Calvinism and capitalism are undeniably connected. The work ethic that Weber discussed and that Innes discussed, which I had mentioned earlier, led to the prosperity enjoyed by many. According to Weber, the modern spirit of capitalism was the idea that profit accrual was an end of itself. Puritans believed in the notion of a calling, the idea that one had a worldly duty to perform to glorify God. Fundamental principles of Puritanism included industry, punctuality, frugality, prudence, and honesty, each of which one can associate with capitalism, with success. By demonstrating these principles, one achieved worldly success, and through this success, a demonstration of God's grace, or being chosen, if you will. In this way, one's worldly success connoted spiritual success. By practicing core Puritan and capitalist values, and thus succeeding in one's calling, one could recognize elect status and ultimately salvation. Thus, by working hard and succeeding in the worldly business, one glorified God and proved one's status as chosen or elect. In this way, religious and economic principles weave together, each supporting and verifying the others. While some came to the colonies for religious reasons and others for economic, the two often dovetailed in this way. So we've gone through a couple of the G's here. I would argue again that God is a very important piece of this puzzle, and it tells you again, why many would migrate to this new world. The peopling of the new world, again, reflects some of this exceptionalism. These other countries had been created, of course. I mean, people developed, they built, they worked for centuries, or or millennia even, in different areas. Whereas this new world would be peopled by other parts of the world. So, again, people like to say, oh, we're a nation of immigrants. Well, not literally, because many of us did not just come over, but we're based on immigration. And, all of us, whether we're an immigrant or not, we have an immigrant ancestor who came over to the New World. And these are some of the reasons they did: gold, God, and glory. We discussed gold and God, glory, meaning one could achieve personal glory. More than likely, though, it was about achieving glory for one's empire. So, for example, Christopher Columbus comes over. Part of it is about his own legacy, but part of it, of course, is about providing that to the Spanish king and queen. Gold, God, and glory, the three main reasons people came to the New World.